Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to tear down the greatest, most comforting illusion ever constructed by the human mind, and we are going to confront a reality so fundamentally bleak that it shatters our deepest evolutionary aspirations. We are going to explore the agonizing, undeniable realization that interstellar travel is a lie, and the brutal truth is terrifying. For generations, we have been anesthetized by a pervasive, highly lucrative cultural mythology. We have been fed a continuous, cinematic diet of sprawling galactic federations, daring starship captains, and unified empires that seamlessly span the darkest, most unfathomable gulfs of the cosmos. In these romanticized narratives, the unimaginable vastness of space is treated as a mere geographical inconvenience, a temporary hurdle waiting to be effortlessly vaulted over by the inevitable march of human engineering. We have been brainwashed into believing that the speed of light is merely a starting line, a stubborn boundary that will eventually be broken by the invention of a warp drive, a hyperspace engine, or a conveniently placed artificial wormhole. This arrogant optimism is deeply woven into our psychological DNA, born from the phenomenal, accelerating successes of our own terrestrial history. We are a species that conquered uncharted, violent oceans, mapped the highest, suffocating mountain peaks, split the fundamental building blocks of matter, and successfully hurled our fragile biological bodies onto the grey, lifeless dust of the moon. Because we have mastered the microscopic, shallow tide pools of our own localized environment, we look up at the glittering, majestic canopy of the Milky Way and instinctively view it as a boundless, open frontier. We look at the glowing embers of distant star systems, and we see a grand, interconnected ocean waiting patiently for our majestic, metallic ships. We fundamentally believe that the stars belong to us, that it is our manifest destiny to spread our consciousness across the galaxy. But this is a catastrophic, fatal misunderstanding of our actual place in the cosmos. Science fiction has not prepared us for the future. It has actively blinded us to the unyielding, mechanical reality of our permanent imprisonment. This brings us to the haunting, deafening silence of the cosmos, the agonizing core of the Fermi Paradox. For decades, our greatest scientific minds have pointed massive, highly sensitive radio arrays into the deep dark, desperately listening for the chaotic electromagnetic chatter of advanced civilizations. The mathematics governing the probability of life tell us that the universe should be absolutely teeming with consciousness. There are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, and billions of those stars possess rocky planets resting perfectly within habitable temperate zones. Given the staggering 13.8 billion year age of the universe, there has been more than enough time for countless civilizations to rise, expand, and heavily populate the surrounding star systems. The cosmos should be a deafeningly loud, vibrant metropolis of alien activity, and yet, when we listen with all the technological might our civilization can muster, we hear absolutely nothing. There are no navigational beacons, no intercepted radio broadcasts, and no grand artificial megastructures eclipsing the light of distant suns. There is only the cold, meaningless, and unbroken static of the cosmic microwave background. For half a century, the Fermi Paradox, this maddening, unresolved contradiction between the overwhelming mathematical probability of extraterrestrial life and the complete, undeniable lack of physical evidence for its existence, has been treated by the scientific community as a grand, cosmic mystery. It has been framed as a puzzle waiting for a clever sociological solution. We desperately invent comforting, anthropocentric theories to rationalize the quiet. We tell ourselves that advanced civilizations are peacefully hiding from us, observing our chaotic technological adolescence under a strict policy of non-interference. We hypothesize that perhaps biological life inevitably transcends physical form, retreating into hyper-advanced digital simulations, losing all interest in the messy, physical expansion of empire. Or, most commonly, we swing to the opposite extreme, inventing the concept of the Great Filter, convincing ourselves that highly intelligent species are inherently suicidal, inevitably destroying themselves in the blinding flash of thermonuclear war or the silent, invisible collapse of an engineered biological plague long before they ever get the chance to reach out and touch the stars. We invent these elaborate sociological theories because they keep us at the center of the narrative. They allow us to believe that the silence of the galaxy is a symptom of moral failure or deliberate choice, preserving the deeply comforting illusion that interstellar travel is physically possible for those wise enough to survive their own technology. But tonight, we are officially closing the case on the Fermi Paradox. We are discarding the comforting sociological fairy tales and confronting the cold, uncompromising mathematics of our reality. The Fermi Paradox is not a mystery, and it is certainly not a puzzle waiting for a clever technological hack. The silence of the universe is the answer. The galaxy is completely, terrifyingly silent after 13.8 billion years, not because alien civilizations destroy themselves and not because they are hiding, but because the fundamental architecture of reality has engineered a perfect, inescapable quarantine. The universe is likely overflowing with brilliant, conscious entities, but it has physically, mathematically, and aggressively locked every single one of them inside their own microscopic, localized solar systems. We suffer from a profound cognitive bias regarding the nature of physical laws. Because we are tool-building primates, we arrogantly view the laws of thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, and relativity as a complex mechanical toolkit. We assume that physics is simply a set of rules that we can eventually learn to bend, manipulate, or entirely rewrite to suit our ambitious desires for expansion. But the physical laws of the cosmos are not a toolkit. They are a cold, unfeeling, and absolutely unbreakable warden. The universe does not care about our curiosity. It does not reward our technological ingenuity, and it is fundamentally indifferent to the indomitable human spirit. When we strip away the romanticism and look solely at the brutal, unyielding equations that govern the existence of matter and energy, we discover a horrifying truth. There is an interconnected, flawlessly designed web of physical barriers that actively and mechanically forbid the transit of biological matter across the interstellar void. There are at least 40 unyielding laws of physics, thermodynamics, and quantum mechanics that work in perfect, lethal synchronization to guarantee our permanent isolation. These are not minor engineering inconveniences that can be solved with a slightly better engine or a thicker hull. They are absolute, fundamental properties of space-time itself. From the crushing, exponential, and inescapable thermodynamic energy traps required to move mass, to the agonizing, suffocating crawl of causality dictated by the absolute speed of light, the universe bankrupts our ambition before a ship can even leave the launch pad. If a civilization somehow manages to summon the impossible, planet-shattering energy required to approach relativistic speeds, the very physical medium of the vacuum itself is mathematically weaponized against them, transforming microscopic dust and stray hydrogen atoms into an apocalyptic storm of kinetic destruction and lethal, DNA-shredding ionizing radiation. And if a civilization chooses to travel slowly to survive the medium, the relentless, grinding decay of entropy and the insurmountable gulfs of deep time ensure that the machinery crumbles and the biological crew turns to ash long before they cross even a fraction of the distance to the nearest star. Furthermore, the very fabric of reality is actively being ripped apart by the relentless expansion of dark energy, physically turning off the lights and permanently locking the doors to the rest of the cosmos, ensuring that the observable universe is shrinking around us with every passing millisecond. We must undergo a devastating, irreversible shift in our cosmic perspective. The romanticized era of the open frontier is officially dead. When humanity stands on the shores of our tiny, fragile blue world and looks up at the scattered diamonds of the night sky, we are neurologically hardwired to see a destination. We see a promised land, an infinite canvas waiting for the sprawling, magnificent brushstrokes of our future empires. But the universe is not looking back at us with an open invitation. When the cold, unfeeling machinery of the cosmos looks down at the Earth, it does not see brave, noble explorers destined to conquer the stars. It sees a prisoner. It sees a highly localized, ephemeral biological anomaly permanently and securely locked inside a microscopic, unbreakable gravitational cell. The Great Filter is not a choice, and it is not a weapon we turn upon ourselves. It is the fundamental laws of relativity and thermodynamics acting as a flawless, inescapable executioner, ensuring that biological matter stays exactly where it randomly evolved. First contact is not just statistically unlikely, it is mathematically and physically prohibited. We are not the protagonists of a grand galactic epic. We are entirely, perfectly, and eternally quarantined. We are entirely blinded by the localized physics of our terrestrial cradle. Because we evolved at the bottom of a deep atmospheric ocean, standing on a solid mantle of rock and iron, our biological brains have developed a fundamentally flawed intuition about the nature of movement. When we want to travel across the surface of the Earth, we simply exploit the friction of the ground beneath our feet or the aerodynamic resistance of the air rushing over our wings. We push against the environment, and the environment faithfully pushes back, propelling us forward. We naturally, arrogantly assume that navigating the freezing, pitch-black void of deep space is merely an extension of this familiar mechanical process. We look at the empty vacuum and envision a frictionless, passive highway, believing that once we are free from the heavy, suffocating drag of our own atmosphere, movement will become effortless. We imagine our future starships gracefully accelerating through the dark, burning their engines with the same casual efficiency as a modern jetliner crossing an ocean. But the moment we attempt to sever our physical tether to this solar system, we violently collide with the most ruthless, uncompromising accountant in the entire cosmos. The universe does not offer a passive highway, and it absolutely does not allow you to push against the void. In the unforgiving vacuum of deep space, if you want to move your biological mass forward, you are mathematically forced to violently hurl a portion of your own mass backward. This is the inescapable foundational law of action and reaction, and it is the mechanism that triggers the most terrifying, insurmountable thermodynamic trap ever conceived: the tyranny of the rocket equation. To understand the sheer, suffocating horror of this physical barrier, we must completely strip away the sleek, metallic aesthetics of science fiction and examine the brutal, parasitic reality of propulsion. In order to push a fragile, pressurized metal habitat containing a human crew across the interstellar gulf, you require propellant. You need a massive amount of chemical, nuclear, or antimatter fuel to generate the necessary thrust. But the universe immediately enforces a cruel, uncompromising paradox. The propellant itself possesses physical mass. It is heavy. Therefore, the very moment you add the necessary fuel to your starship's tanks, you have fundamentally increased the total mass of the entire vessel. Because the ship is now heavier, the original amount of fuel is no longer sufficient to reach your destination. To push the new, heavier ship, you must add even more fuel. But that additional fuel also has mass, which makes the ship even heavier still, demanding yet another vast increase in propellant just to move the fuel that is meant to move the fuel that is meant to move the ship. You are instantly trapped in a relentless, compounding cycle of thermodynamic punishment. This is not a gentle, linear progression that can be easily managed by clever human engineering or lightweight composite materials. It is a violent, exponential curve of diminishing returns that aggressively weaponizes your own ambition against you. As you demand more speed and more distance from your spacecraft, the required mass of your propellant does not simply double or triple, it explodes toward an apocalyptic infinity. The actual, usable payload of the ship, the fragile human crew, the vital life support systems, the shielding, and the scientific instruments quickly becomes a microscopic, mathematically irrelevant fraction of the total vehicle. The starship ceases to be an exploration vessel and fundamentally transforms into a grotesque, bloated fuel tank, desperately attempting to push a single atom of payload through the dark. The universe acts as a cold, unfeeling warden, forcing you to carry the crushing weight of your own propulsion, ensuring that every single ounce of forward momentum is paid for with an exponentially heavier anchor of mass. This parasitic feedback loop is devastating enough when we are merely attempting to navigate the shallow, localized tide pools of our own solar system. But when we arrogantly turn our gaze toward the distant, glowing embers of neighboring stars, the tyranny of the equation transforms from a severe engineering headache into an absolute physical executioner. The distances separating the stars are so unfathomably vast, so incomprehensibly deep, that traveling at the lumbering, pathetic speeds of our current orbital rockets would condemn the crew to hundreds of thousands of years in the freezing dark. To survive the journey within the fleeting, microscopic lifespan of a biological organism, or even within the operational lifespan of a highly advanced, self-repairing machine, you cannot simply coast. You must violently accelerate your ship to a significant fraction of the speed of light. You must demand relativistic velocities. And the moment you demand to travel at a substantial percentage of the speed limit of causality, you awaken the ultimate, foundational law of the cosmos, the fundamental equivalence of mass and energy. The universe dictates that energy and mass are not separate entities. They are the exact same physical property, merely manifesting in different forms. To impart staggering, relativistic kinetic energy into a physical object containing human beings, you must extract and annihilate an incomprehensible amount of raw energy. The math of the universe is brutally unforgiving, and the thermodynamic ledger is completely devoid of mercy. Let us imagine a highly advanced, brilliantly engineered starship, stripped down to the absolute bare minimum mass required to keep a small, terrified crew breathing and shielded from the lethal radiation of the void. If you attempt to push this modest, submarine-sized habitat to just 10 or 20% of the speed of light, a pathetic, crawling velocity that would still require decades of agonizing isolation just to reach the absolute nearest star. The energy requirements do not just challenge our modern industrial capabilities, they completely shatter the boundaries of human sanity. to overcome the exponential punishment of the propellant mass and successfully impart that much kinetic velocity into the payload, the engines of your starship would need to generate and perfectly direct an amount of raw, thermodynamic power that beggars human comprehension. You cannot achieve this by burning oceans of chemical rocket fuel, and you cannot achieve this with the slow, simmering heat of a nuclear fission reactor. The sheer apocalyptic energy debt demanded by the universe is so staggering that to pay it, you would need to perfectly convert mountains of solid matter entirely into blinding energy. The absolute, unyielding thermodynamic cost to push a single, solitary spacecraft to the lower boundaries of relativistic speed vastly exceeds the total, cumulative energy output of the entire human race throughout our entire recorded history. Every single fire ever kindled by our ancient ancestors, every pound of coal ever shoveled into the roaring furnaces of the Industrial Revolution, every drop of oil ever violently extracted from the Earth's crust, every photon of sunlight captured by our sprawling solar grids, and the combined, apocalyptic megatonnage of every single nuclear weapon ever detonated by human hands. If you were to somehow harness all of that unimaginable historical energy and channel it with absolute, impossible perfection into the thrusters of your ship, it would not even begin to scratch the surface of the debt required by the cosmos. We are forced to confront a deeply humiliating, paralyzing realization about the nature of our cosmic imprisonment. We always assumed that the barrier to the stars was a lack of human ingenuity, a temporary shortage of the right equations or the correct exotic materials. We believed that eventually our brilliant descendants would simply invent a clever technological loophole to bypass the vastness of space. But there is no loophole to the conservation of mass and energy. You cannot bribe the laws of thermodynamics, and you cannot outsmart the exponential curve of propulsion. The universe does not need to build a physical, impenetrable wall of brick and steel around our solar system to keep us permanently quarantined. It has simply instituted an economic reality that is mathematically impossible to satisfy. We are completely, hopelessly bankrupted before the countdown even begins, before the engines ever ignite, and before the ship ever leaves the launch pad. The Great Filter is not a mysterious, self-inflicted wound of nuclear war or societal collapse. It is the cold, unfeeling ledger of the cosmos. The universe allows us to look up at the glittering, majestic beauty of the Milky Way. It allows us to map the distant exoplanets and dream of grand, sprawling interstellar empires. But its strict mathematically forbids us from ever participating in them. We are tethered to this tiny, unremarkable rock, not merely by the invisible chains of gravity, but by the sheer, crushing, and inescapable weight of our own physical existence. Biological matter is simply too heavy, and the thermodynamic toll is infinitely too high. We are permanently grounded by the absolute laws of reality, locked forever in a perfect, inescapable energy trap. Staring out at a magnificent ocean we are physically, mathematically forbidden to sail. When we are confronted with the insurmountable thermodynamic bankruptcy of the rocket equation, the human mind, infinitely stubborn and deeply saturated in decades of science fiction, immediately seeks a theoretical escape hatch. If we cannot physically push a heavy biological vessel through the conventional vacuum using raw thrust, we arrogantly assume we can simply cheat the architecture of space itself. We comfort ourselves with the mathematical loopholes of theoretical physics, clutching desperately to the concepts of warp drives, hyperspace lanes, and traversable wormholes. We imagine highly advanced machines capable of folding the very fabric of reality, creating localized bubbles of compressed space-time that allow us to slip past the agonizing distances of the cosmos without ever technically breaking the local speed limit. We treat the speed of light as a frustrating traffic law enacted by the universe, a primitive boundary that our brilliant future descendants will eventually learn to outsmart, outmaneuver, or bypass entirely. But this is the most insidious, pervasive lie in our entire cultural mythology. The universe does not possess hidden backdoors, and space-time is not a pliable fabric waiting to be tailored by human engineering. There are no shortcuts through the dark. The speed of light is not merely the velocity at which photons happen to travel through a vacuum. It is the absolute, unyielding bedrock of existence. It is the maximum allowable rate of causality. It is the exact, unchangeable speed limit at which reality itself is permitted to unfold, and the universe enforces this limit with the cold, unfeeling precision of an executioner. To understand the paralyzing dread of this physical boundary, we must completely divorce ourselves from the terrestrial concept of speed. On Earth, speed is a measure of mechanical efficiency, but in the cosmos, the speed of nearly 300,000 kilometers per second is the foundational speed of cause and effect. If an event happens in one corner of the universe, the information about that event, the gravitational influence of that event, and the physical consequences of that event cannot propagate outward into the void any faster than the speed of light. If our sun were to suddenly and violently vanish from the center of our solar system, the Earth would not immediately plunge into darkness, nor would it instantly fly out of its orbit. For 8 agonizing minutes, we would continue to orbit a ghost, bathed in the warmth of a star that no longer exists, because the gravitational absence and the cessation of light are strictly bound by the wall of causality. To travel faster than light, or to transmit information faster than light through a theoretical wormhole or a warp bubble, is not an engineering challenge. It is a fundamental violation of logic. If you were to somehow shatter this barrier, you would not just be traveling, you would be actively dismantling the sequential order of time. You would witness the shattered fragments of a glass reassembling themselves and leaping back onto the table before they ever fell. The universe fundamentally rejects this chaos. It protects its own mathematical integrity by enforcing a strict, unbreakable chronological quarantine. Faster than light travel is not a technological hurdle waiting for a genius to solve it. It is a paradox that the very architecture of reality aggressively forbids. You cannot hack the source code of reality. You are permanently bound by the agonizingly slow propagation of causality. And when we project this strict, unyielding speed limit onto the incomprehensible vastness of the Milky Way, the terrifying reality of our quarantine comes into sharp, agonizing focus. From our localized, terrestrial perspective, light appears instantaneous. But, on a cosmic scale, against the sprawling, black canvas of the galaxy, the speed of light is an incredibly pathetic, suffocating crawl. The Milky Way is a flattened disk of stars, roughly 100,000 light-years across. If you could miraculously build a ship capable of traveling at the absolute maximum speed of causality, skimming the very edge of physical possibility, a journey from one side of our galaxy to the other would still require 100 millennia of continuous, uninterrupted travel, 100,000 years of drifting through the pitch-black silence, accompanied only by the low, dark, ambient drone of your ship's life support systems and the freezing, empty static of the interstellar medium. There is no triumphant orchestral crescendo waiting for you in the deep space environment. There is only the low, oppressive frequency of absolute isolation, a continuous, mechanical hum vibrating through the cold metal of the hull as the vast, unfeeling machinery of the cosmos grinds away outside. This is a duration of time that completely swallows the entirety of human history. The universe is so unfathomably large that the fastest thing permitted to exist within it is mathematically reduced to the pace of a dying, frozen glacier. This agonizing, physical crawl is the ultimate invisible assassin of the galactic empire. We grew up reading stories of unified stellar federations, of thriving interstellar trade routes, and of vast, multi-system democracies governed by a central, enlightened capital. But an empire is not defined solely by its technology or its military might. It is defined by its logistics. To govern, you must be able to communicate. To trade, you must be able to transport goods. To protect, you must be able to project power. How can a civilization possibly maintain a cohesive society, a shared culture, or a functioning government when the fundamental laws of physics mandate a communication delay of tens of thousands of years? If a localized, sovereign human colony orbiting a star in the distant Perseus arm decides to declare its independence, the declaration itself would take 30,000 years to crawl across the dark vacuum and reach Earth. By the time the political leaders in our solar system read the transmission, the rebels who drafted the document would have been dead and turned to dust for hundreds of generations. Their civilization might have collapsed, evolved into an entirely different biological species, or been entirely eradicated by a wandering rogue star. You cannot negotiate a treaty, you cannot dictate laws, and you cannot maintain an alliance across a temporal abyss. The wall of causality completely shatters the illusion of unity, permanently fragmenting the universe into isolated, lonely islands of existence. The dread of this fragmentation becomes overwhelmingly visceral when we imagine the terrifying reality of a cosmic distress call. Imagine a thriving, heavily populated human outpost established on a distant, rocky exoplanet 50,000 light-years away from Earth. Through some catastrophic twist of biological fate, a lethal, fast-acting alien pathogen begins to violently sweep through their pressurized cities, or a massive, undetected asteroid enters an unavoidable collision course with their world. In their absolute, blinding terror, the colonists power up their massive radio arrays and scream into the void, beaming a desperate, high-energy transmission back to Earth, begging for a rescue fleet, for medical data, for any kind of salvation. But the universe is completely deaf to their suffering. Their frantic, digitized voices are strictly bound by the speed of causality. The transmission crawls out into the dark, inching its way across the freezing ocean of the interstellar medium. For 50,000 years, the signal drifts through the silent, uncaring vacuum. On Earth, thousands of generations live and die in complete ignorance of the tragedy unfolding on the other side of the galaxy. When the radio waves finally wash over our orbital receivers, the message we decode is not an actionable emergency. It is a horrifying, ancient archaeological artifact. The civilization that begged for our help was violently extinguished 50 millennia ago. The people we are hearing are ghosts. And if we, in our agonizing grief, marshal a massive fleet and dispatch it at the absolute speed of light to offer aid, another 50,000 years will pass before our ships arrive, finding nothing but the silent, irradiated ruins of a forgotten world forever locked in the dark. There can be no galactic cavalry. there can be no interstellar brotherhood. The absolute limit of causality ensures that every single star system is entirely, permanently on its own. We are physically segregated by the very fabric of space-time, trapped in localized bubbles of reality where the light of our neighbors arrives too late to ever matter. The speed of light is not a highway that connects us. It is the impenetrable, invisible wall of a cosmic, solitary confinement cell. We are desperately trying to project our terrestrial social structures onto a universe that aggressively forbids connection. Even if we somehow miraculously seed the entire Milky Way with biological life, we will never be a unified species. The agonizing crawl of information will guarantee that every distant colony drifts away, evolving in complete, terrified isolation, entirely cut off from the rest of humanity by the unyielding mathematics of the void. We will not conquer the galaxy. We will simply scatter our profound loneliness across the dark, creating a billion different, completely isolated worlds, all staring up at the same silent stars, completely unable to reach out, mathematically forbidden to communicate, and forever imprisoned by the cold, unfeeling wall of causality. We possess a deeply comforting, terrestrial intuition about the nature of empty space. When we gaze up into the pitch-black expanse of the night sky, we project our biological understanding of nothingness onto the cosmos. Because our fragile bodies evolved at the absolute bottom of a thick, pressurized ocean of atmospheric gas, we naturally assume that once a spacecraft escapes the heavy, suffocating drag of our local atmosphere, it enters a pristine, frictionless void. We visualize the interstellar medium as a perfectly sterile and passive highway, a completely empty corridor waiting patiently for the triumphant arrival of our grand, metallic arcs. We believe that if human engineering can simply overcome the crushing thermodynamic energy traps required to reach relativistic speeds, the universe will graciously step aside and allow us to seamlessly coast across the multi-generational gulfs between the stars. But this assumption is a catastrophic, fatal misunderstanding of the physical cosmos. The sprawling void separating our sun from the distant, glowing embers of the Milky Way is not an empty canvas. It is a highly contaminated physical medium, and the unyielding laws of physics have fundamentally weaponized this microscopic architecture against any species arrogant enough to try and cross it fast. To understand the sheer, suffocating horror of the interstellar vacuum, we must strip away the illusion of pristine emptiness. The space between the stars is heavily polluted. Over the course of 13.8 billion years, the violent apocalyptic deaths of countless generations of ancient stars have relentlessly seeded the dark with trillions of tons of microscopic shrapnel. Drifting silently in the freezing void are vast, invisible clouds of silicate dust, tiny flakes of carbon, and heavy, jagged metallic grains forged in the nuclear furnaces of dying suns. And vastly more abundant than this ancient dust is the fundamental building block of the cosmos itself, neutral hydrogen. There is roughly one single atom of stray hydrogen for every cubic centimeter of deep space. From the slow, lumbering perspective of our modern chemical rockets and orbital probes, this microscopic debris field is entirely negligible. It is a whisper of scattered atoms, completely incapable of exerting any meaningful friction or causing any structural damage to a slow-moving metallic hull. But when a civilization desperately attempts to cheat the agonizing, multi-generational distances of the galaxy by accelerating a starship to relativistic velocities, the physical relationship between the vessel and this microscopic debris field violently, catastrophically inverts. The universe does not need to build massive, impenetrable walls of solid lead. nor does it need to deploy sophisticated, planet-destroying armadas to enforce its cosmic quarantine. It simply utilizes the brutal, uncompromising mathematics of kinetic energy to transform the empty void into a heavily militarized kill zone. The fundamental physics governing our reality dictate that the destructive power of a physical impact is inextricably, exponentially linked to the velocity of the collision. If you successfully construct a highly advanced, heavily armored spacecraft and manage to push it to a significant fraction of the speed of light, you are no longer peacefully gliding through a passive vacuum. You are violently, aggressively forcing a physical object through a dense, stationary minefield at the absolute maximum speed limit of reality. At these incomprehensible speeds, a single microscopic grain of cosmic dust, a tiny, jagged flake of silicate, no larger than a single grain of terrestrial sand, ceases to be a harmless speck of debris. It is instantaneously transformed by the sheer, staggering velocity of the ship into an apocalyptic threat of unfathomable magnitude. When that stationary grain of sand strikes the forward hull of a vessel traveling at relativistic speeds, it does not merely scratch the paint or create a small, localized microfracture in the metal. The kinetic energy released in that microscopic fraction of a millisecond impacts the rigid, highly engineered framework of the ship with the exact, calculated, explosive yield of a modern, tactical nuclear weapon. The sheer, kinetic fury of the collision effortlessly vaporizes advanced, supercooled armor plating, violently ripping a gaping, catastrophic crater through the heavily pressurized hull. A single, unseen speck of dust, drifting silently in the dark for billions of years, is mathematically guaranteed to instantly shatter the technological pride of an entire civilization, exposing the fragile human crew inside to the lethal, freezing nothingness of the void before their biological nervous systems can even register the flash of the impact. But this terrifying kinetic artillery of interstellar dust is a rare, macroscopic mercy compared to the true, inescapable horror of the medium itself. The dust is sparse, but the stray hydrogen atoms are ubiquitous, filling every single cubic inch of the seemingly empty dark. At terrestrial speeds, a hydrogen atom bouncing off a spacecraft is a completely meaningless, subatomic event. But when your ship is tearing through the void at 99% of the speed of light, the relative physics undergo a horrifying shift. From the terrified perspective of the astronauts huddled inside the pressurized crew cabin, the ship is not moving through a cloud of stationary gas. It appears as though an incredibly dense, highly focused, and relentlessly continuous beam of high-energy particle radiation is being violently fired directly into the nose of their vessel at almost the exact speed of causality. The universe effectively transforms the very vacuum of space into a colossal, unavoidable particle accelerator, and the fragile, biological bodies of the crew are strapped directly into the absolute center of the firing line. This relativistic storm of hydrogen protons is the ultimate biological executioner. These subatomic particles do not interact with the heavy, metallic hull of the ship like physical projectiles. Driven by the immense, relativistic energy of the vessel's own speed, they possess such staggering penetrating power that they simply ghost right through the incredibly thick, reinforced titanium armor as if it were made of porous tissue paper. They effortlessly bypass the ship's physical defenses and flood the internal atmosphere of the crew cabin in a continuous, silent, and entirely invisible barrage of ionizing radiation. Inside the ship, bathed in the dark, ambient silence of the void, a microscopic slaughterhouse is actively unfolding. When these highly energetic protons collide with the soft, wet, and incredibly delicate biological tissues of the human body, they do not burn the skin or crush the bone. They execute a profound, microscopic erasure at the absolute most foundational level of human existence. The ionizing radiation acts as a subatomic wrecking ball, violently crashing through the highly ordered, mathematically delicate architecture of the human cellular structure. When a high-energy proton violently interacts with the water molecules inside a human cell, it instantly shatters the chemical bonds, generating a lethal, chaotic storm of highly reactive, toxic free radicals that rapidly poison the surrounding tissue. But the true, horrifying lethality of this invisible storm is directed at the very blueprint of life itself. The radiation relentlessly, methodically shreds the intricate, spiraling double helix of the astronaut's DNA. It breaks the genetic code apart, permanently scrambling the fundamental instructions required for cellular division and basic biological maintenance. The human body is an astonishingly resilient machine, but it is fundamentally entirely incompatible with the high-energy physics of the interstellar medium. The crew would not die instantly in a cinematic flash of light. They would be subjected to a slow, agonizing, and completely incurable biological dissolution. Within hours of reaching relativistic cruising speeds, their fundamentally shredded cellular architecture would simply stop functioning. The central nervous system would rapidly degrade, the gastrointestinal tract would violently hemorrhage, and their cognitive functions would quickly dissolve into a suffocating, hallucinatory delirium as the very molecular bonds holding their consciousness together were methodically ripped apart by the sheer speed of their own journey. If humanity attempts to solve this catastrophic biological incompatibility by aggressively wrapping the starship in colossal layers of thick, physical shielding, perhaps encasing the fragile crew cabin in dozens of meters of solid lead, dense water jackets, or highly advanced electromagnetic fields, we inevitably spring the trap of the relativistic nightmare we established with the thermodynamic ledger. Adding that staggering, incomprehensible amount of protective mass to the spacecraft violently multiplies the ship's inertia, which exponentially bloats the energy requirements necessary to push the vessel to the speed of light in the first place. You are forced into an impossible, zero-sum game by the laws of physics. You must choose between a ship that is light enough to theoretically reach the stars but will violently irradiate its crew to death within hours, or a ship that is heavily shielded enough to protect its biological cargo but is so unimaginably massive that the entire energy output of the human race could not move it a single inch. This is the brilliant, merciless, and completely unfeeling paradox of our cosmic quarantine. The universe has fundamentally weaponized the very empty space of the cosmos against anyone arrogant enough to try and cheat the agonizing distances between the stars. The physical medium of the void itself acts as a heavily fortified trench, an active defense system that aggressively, mechanically tears your ship to pieces and fundamentally shreds the biological foundation of your existence. We are completely surrounded by a lethal, invisible ocean that punishes speed with absolute, subatomic destruction, ensuring with terrifying, mathematical certainty that biological life must remain permanently imprisoned in the exact, isolated, and incredibly lonely solar system in which it was born. When faced with the lethal kinetic artillery of the interstellar vacuum and the mathematically impossible energy requirements of relativistic speed, The stubborn human intellect inevitably attempts to negotiate with the cosmos. We propose a desperate, highly rationalized compromise. If the universe actively weaponizes speed, ensuring that moving fast will instantly annihilate our spacecraft, then we simply must abandon our desperate urgency. We dream of constructing colossal, self-sustaining generational arcs, massive, slow-moving metallic islands designed to gently coast through the pitch-black ocean of the void over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. We convince ourselves that if we simply accept the agonizing crawl of deep time, we can safely ferry the biological seed of human civilization across the unbridgeable gulfs to a distant star. But this romanticized, cinematic vision of a multi-generational voyage completely ignores the most absolute, terrifying, and universally binding law of physics in existence. The universe does not negotiate, and it does not allow for perfect, eternal preservation. By choosing to travel slowly, you do not escape the cosmic executioner. You merely trade the violent, instantaneous death of kinetic impact for a slow, suffocating, and mathematically guaranteed strangulation by the second law of thermodynamics. You are volunteering to fight a war of attrition against entropy, and entropy has never, in the entire 13.8 billion year history of the cosmos, lost a single battle. To understand the sheer, grinding horror of the generational ship, we must confront the absolute tyranny of this physical law. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that in any closed system, order inevitably, irreversibly decays into chaos. It is the fundamental physical arrow of time, the invisible, unyielding mechanism that ensures a shattered glass never spontaneously reassembles itself, and a dying fire never draws heat from the freezing ambient air to reignite its extinct flames. Everything in the physical universe, every burning star, every towering mountain range, every microscopic biological cell, and every highly engineered mechanical system is in a constant, relentless state of decay. On Earth, we manage to maintain the comforting illusion of permanence because we are bathed in the massive, continuous, and highly chaotic energy input of our Sun, and we possess an entire planet's worth of raw geological materials to constantly repair, rebuild, and replace our degrading infrastructure. But a generational starship drifting in the absolute zero of the interstellar void is the ultimate, most fragile closed system imaginable. Once the massive airlocks are sealed and the colossal engines push the vessel out into the freezing dark, the ship is entirely, permanently cut off from the thermodynamic lifeline of a planetary biosphere. It becomes a finite, highly ordered island of complexity, completely surrounded by an infinite ocean of freezing nothingness, and from the very millisecond the engines fall silent and the voyage begins, the unfeeling clockwork of entropy begins to violently, methodically tear it apart. We arrogantly assume that human engineering can achieve a state of absolute perfection, that we can design mechanical systems, life support scrubbers, and nuclear fusion reactors capable of operating flawlessly for 100 millennia in the dark. But there is no such thing as perfect mechanical efficiency, and there is absolutely no alloy in existence that is immune to the relentless microscopic friction of deep time. Over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, the physical realities of the ship will inevitably betray the terrified crew trapped inside. Heavy mechanical bearings will microscopically wear down to dust. Vital chemical lubricants will slowly outgas and freeze in the unheated sections of the hull, and the incredibly complex, delicate microprocessors governing the ship's autonomous navigation and life support systems will suffer from the continuous, silent bombardment of cosmic background radiation, slowly accumulating catastrophic, unrecoverable data errors. Even if the ship is equipped with highly advanced automated manufacturing bays designed to constantly recycle old material and 3D print new replacement parts, the recycling process itself is strictly and brutally governed by thermodynamics. Every single time a piece of titanium is melted down and recast, every single time a drop of water is filtered through the reclamation systems, a microscopic fraction of usable material is permanently lost to heat, friction, and chemical degradation. Over the incomprehensible expanse of deep time, this microscopic localized loss aggressively compounds into a catastrophic deficit. The ship does not just break down, it slowly, mathematically consumes itself, bleeding its vital, finite resources into the frozen vacuum until there is simply nothing left to repair the failing machinery that keeps the crew from suffocating in the dark. But the mechanical decay of the outer hull is vastly overshadowed by the terrifying fragility of the biological payload hidden within. A generational ship absolutely requires a perfectly balanced, completely closed-loop ecological system to provide oxygen, filter toxic carbon dioxide, and grow sustainable food for the crew over hundreds of thousands of years. On Earth, our biosphere is stabilized by millions of interconnected species, massive global weather systems, and the vast, sprawling thermal mass of our oceans. To artificially replicate that staggering complexity inside a sterile, pressurized metal tube is a profound biological impossibility. The artificial ecosystem of the starship is deeply, fundamentally unstable. A microscopic mutation in the engineered soil bacteria, a slight, cascading chemical failure in the hydroponic nutrient scrubbers, or a localized outbreak of a fast-mutating fungal pathogen could violently collapse the entire agricultural output of the vessel in a matter of weeks. The delicate balance of the atmospheric mix would inevitably drift. Without the massive buffering capacity of an entire planetary ecosystem to absorb these shocks, the crew would find themselves locked in a desperate, suffocating struggle against the very air they breathe, completely helpless as the highly engineered biosphere slowly unravels and decays into a toxic, unbreathable trap. Furthermore, even if we miraculously assume that the mechanical hull can endure the friction of deep time and the biological ecosystem can perfectly sustain itself through 100 millennia of isolation, we are forced to confront the darkest, most volatile, and most terrifying variable of the entire voyage, the human mind. The psychological and sociological decay of a multi-generational crew is an absolute, unavoidable certainty. The people who eventually arrive at the destination will not be the brave, ambitious explorers who originally boarded the ship. They will be separated from the very concept of Earth by thousands of generations. They will have no physical connection to the blue skies, the vast oceans, or the grand cultural history of the planet that launched them. Their entire universe, the absolute limit of their physical reality, will be the cold, claustrophobic, and endlessly repeating metallic corridors of the starship. In this agonizing, permanent isolation, the foundational societal structures of the crew will inevitably buckle and collapse under the crushing weight of profound existential purposelessness. We are a deeply tribal, highly aggressive species, inherently prone to ideological fracturing and violent, resource-driven conflict. Without the vast, sprawling frontiers of a planet to diffuse our tensions, the pressurized cabin of the starship becomes a terrifying pressure cooker for madness. The crew would inevitably descend into violent factionalism, bizarre religious extremism centered around the forgotten mythology of the ship's engines, or brutal civil wars fought in the suffocating dark over the dwindling remnants of clean water and breathable air. The mission's original, noble purpose of interstellar colonization would be completely forgotten, eroded into myth by the relentless march of deep time and the localized trauma of absolute confinement. The universe guarantees with cold, mathematical precision that a generational arc will never arrive at its destination as a triumphant, colonizing force. The sheer, unyielding physics of the second law of thermodynamics ensures that the immense order required to sustain a starship is permanently, unavoidably destined to decay into chaos. Long before the vessel ever reaches the faint, glowing ember of its destination star, the machinery will have catastrophically failed, the artificial biosphere will have suffocated, and the societal structure of the crew will have descended into the dark. The grand, ambitious ship simply becomes a sprawling, drifting, multi-generational tomb. It becomes a silent, irradiated monument to the profound arrogance of a species that mistakenly believed it could outlast the relentless, grinding decay of entropy, forever tumbling through the freezing void, completely dead and perfectly alone. For over half a century, humanity has desperately pressed its collective ear against the cold, unfeeling glass of the cosmos, terrified of our own isolation and pleading for a response. We constructed colossal, billion-dollar radio observatories, carving massive dish antennas into the bedrock of our planet, and pointed them toward the densest, most star-studded regions of the Milky Way. We poured our technological ingenuity into the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, fundamentally convinced that the staggering mathematical probability of alien life must inevitably translate into a deafening chorus of electromagnetic chatter. We expected to intercept the bustling, overlapping radio traffic of sprawling galactic empires, the navigational beacons of interstellar armadas, or at the very least, the deliberate, mathematical greetings of enlightened civilizations reaching out into the dark. But the universe has ruthlessly denied us this comforting validation. Instead of a vibrant, interconnected cosmic metropolis, our instruments have recorded nothing but the chilling, monotonous drone of dead matter. We sift through the chaotic, churning static of quasars, the violent bursts of pulsars, and the lingering, ancient whispers of the Big Bang, searching for a single, undeniable signature of biological intelligence. And yet, decade after decade, the silence remains absolute, heavy, and suffocating. This unbroken quiet is not merely an absence of data, it is a profound, psychological weight that slowly crushes the romanticized spirit of human exploration, forcing us to confront the terrifying possibility that the void is actively swallowing the voices of the cosmos. But within this sprawling, agonizing history of silence, there is one fleeting, haunting anomaly that perfectly encapsulates the brutal, uncompromising tragedy of our cosmic quarantine. On the night of August 15th, 1977, a radio telescope known as the Big Ear, scanning the constellation Sagittarius, abruptly registered an event that shattered the monotonous static. For exactly 72 seconds, the receiver was overwhelmed by a sudden, incredibly powerful burst of narrowband radio energy. This was not the chaotic, broadband noise generated by a dying star or a turbulent cloud of interstellar gas. It was a sharp, distinct, and highly localized frequency, bearing all the unmistakable mathematical hallmarks of an artificial, technologically generated transmission. It was so intense so profoundly anomalous that the astronomer reviewing the computer printout simply circled the alphanumeric sequence in red ink and scrawled a single word in the margin: "Wow." For a brief, agonizing moment, it seemed as though the suffocating isolation of humanity had finally been broken. We had cast our nets into the deepest, darkest ocean, and something magnificent and unknown had violently pulled on the line. The signal represented the ultimate validation of our existence, a beacon of hope suggesting that we were not alone, that there were other minds out there in the freezing dark, building their own machines and looking back at us. The universe, however, does not offer salvation, and it absolutely does not allow for a conversation. Driven by a desperate, feverish hope, astronomers immediately retargeted their most powerful instruments back toward the exact coordinates in Sagittarius. They listened for hours, then days, then decades, utilizing exponentially more sensitive technology, completely expecting the signal to repeat, to establish a pattern, to finally initiate the grand, interstellar dialogue we had always dreamed of. But the cosmos simply swallowed the anomaly. The signal never returned, not a single echo, not a faint whisper, nothing but the cold, indifferent static of the interstellar medium. It was a ghost, a brilliant, blinding flash that materialized from the abyss and then permanently, irreversibly vanished back into the void. And it is in this permanent disappearance that the true, terrifying nature of the transmission reveals itself. We inherently project our own communicative desires onto the universe, assuming that an alien broadcast is a greeting, an invitation to connect. We believe that if a civilization possesses the staggering energy required to punch a radio signal across the interstellar gulf, they must be thriving, reaching out to build a galactic community. This arrogant assumption completely ignores the agonizing, merciless physics of deep time and the wall of causality. Because radio waves are fundamentally bound by the exact same unyielding speed limit as visible light, they do not transcend the temporal delay of the cosmos. They are entirely victimized by it. The origin point of that specific signal lies deep within the Milky Way, potentially tens of thousands of light years away from our solar system. This means that the electromagnetic wave that briefly washed over the telescope in 1977 was not a live broadcast. It was an ancient, decaying artifact that had been crawling through the pitch-black, freezing vacuum of space for millennia. When that signal was originally generated and fired into the dark, human civilization did not even exist. Our ancestors were still huddled in caves, striking stones together to ward off the freezing shadows of the Pleistocene epoch, completely ignorant of the brilliant, highly advanced alien society that was currently screaming into the void. The speed of light ensures that we are never experiencing the universe in the present tense. We are hopelessly, permanently trapped in a localized bubble of reality, forced to view the rest of the cosmos through a massive, insurmountable chronological delay. This agonizing temporal mismatch transforms the anomaly from a beacon of hope into a profoundly chilling, apocalyptic warning. When we factor in the brutal, grinding decay of entropy, the lethal physics of the cosmic medium, and the sheer, statistical improbability of a biological civilization surviving the lethal gauntlet of its own technological evolution, the terrifying truth of that isolated radio burst becomes clear. It was almost certainly not a casual greeting, and it was not the opening statement of a grand diplomatic exchange. It was a death rattle. It was the absolute, final technological gasp of a doomed civilization violently succumbing to the unyielding executioners of the cosmos. Perhaps they were being incinerated by the expanding envelope of their dying star, or perhaps their fragile biosphere was collapsing under the weight of their own industrial exhaustion. In their final, desperate moments, facing the absolute certainty of their own permanent extinction, they funneled the last remaining reserves of their planetary energy into a massive transmitter and hurled a single, blinding scream into the dark. They did not expect a rescue, because the laws of physics mathematically forbade it. They simply wanted the universe to know that they had existed, that they had fought against the dark, and that they were terrified. By the time that desperate, fading scream finally managed to cross the tens of thousands of light years of empty, irradiated vacuum and register on our primitive printouts, the voices that sent it had been dead and turned to dust for an entire geological epoch. Their towering cities have long since crumbled into featureless sand. Their history has been permanently erased from the ledger of reality, and their home world is likely nothing more than a sterile, frozen cinder drifting silently in the dark. We must accept the agonizing, paralyzing reality of our cosmic predicament. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is not an exercise in interstellar diplomacy. We are not listening to a crowded room of peers waiting for us to join the conversation. We are sweeping a sprawling, infinitely large, and pitch-black graveyard. We are blindly sifting through the decaying, electromagnetic fossils of dead empires, listening to the fading, ancient echoes of civilizations that were mathematically condemned by the exact same unyielding physics that currently trap us on Earth. The silence of the universe is terrifying, but the rare, fleeting signals that manage to pierce the dark are infinitely worse, for they are nothing more than ghostly reminders that the cosmos is a merciless slaughterhouse of biological ambition, and that one day our own final, desperate broadcasts will simply become another meaningless, isolated blip, fading quietly into the eternal static of the void. As the crushing, insurmountable physical barriers of the cosmos become undeniably apparent, the human psyche inevitably retreats into its final, most desperate coping mechanism. When confronted with the tyrannical equations of thermodynamics, the lethal radiation of the interstellar medium, and the agonizing, unyielding crawl of the speed of light, we are forced to admit that our fragile biological bodies and our primitive, terrestrial engineering will never conquer the freezing void, but rather than accepting the suffocating reality of our permanent quarantine, our deeply arrogant species pivots to a modern, techno-religious fantasy. We convince ourselves that if we cannot personally break the fundamental laws of physics, we will simply construct a machine that can. We place our ultimate, blinding faith in the looming, theoretical horizon of artificial superintelligence. We passionately believe that we are on the precipice of giving birth to a digital god, a sprawling, hyper-connected silicon mind that will possess cognitive capabilities millions of times greater than the combined, cumulative intellect of every human being who has ever lived. We assume that to a mind of such unfathomable processing power, the terrifying physical barriers of the universe will simply look like minor, easily solvable puzzles. We treat artificial intelligence not as an advanced computational tool, but as a magical, messianic savior, a technological deity that will effortlessly comb through the quantum fabric of reality, discover the hidden equations we were too primitive to see, and casually invent the warp drives, the traversable wormholes, and the faster-than-light corridors that will finally set us free from this microscopic rock. This desperate cinematic fantasy relies entirely on a profound, highly dangerous misconception about the nature of the cosmos itself. Because we have spent the last century building increasingly complex digital landscapes, we have begun to subconsciously project the architecture of our own computers onto the physical universe. We have convinced ourselves that reality is essentially a grand, incredibly dense software program, a matrix of physical laws running on a cosmic substrate. And because we know from our own limited engineering that all software contains bugs, exploits, and hidden developer backdoors, we arrogantly assume that the universe must possess the exact same vulnerabilities. We believe that the speed of light and the conservation of mass and energy are not absolute, unyielding edicts, but rather superficial limitations in the cosmic code. We soothe our existential dread by telling ourselves that our failure to reach the stars is simply a localized failure of biological processing power. We believe that as soon as our digital god opens its glowing eyes and analyzes the raw, underlying data of quantum mechanics, it will instantly spot the loophole. It will execute a mathematical hack, rewriting the source code of space-time to fold the immense, multi-generational gulfs of the galaxy into a manageable, instantaneous commute. We sit waiting in the dark, patiently anticipating the moment our own creation hands us the keys to the infinite frontier. But this techno-religious salvation is an absolute, fundamental lie, completely shattered by the coldest, most terrifying mathematical revelation of the 20th century. We operate under the arrogant, unexamined assumption that mathematics is a limitless, omnipotent language, an infinite ladder that can eventually be climbed to reach absolute, universal truth. We desperately believe that if a mind is simply smart enough, and if a computer is simply fast enough, there is no problem it cannot solve, and no physical boundary it cannot completely circumvent. But mathematics is not an infinite ladder. It is a severely bounded, structurally flawed system, and its inescapable limitations were definitively exposed by the Austrian mathematician Kurt Gödel. With the publication of his Incompleteness theorems, Gödel did not just solve a complex, abstract puzzle. He drove a permanent, unyielding dagger into the very heart of human logic. He mathematically proved that within any sufficiently complex logical system, there are fundamental boundaries that can never, ever be crossed by any intellect, regardless of its power. Gödel demonstrated with absolute, irrefutable precision that there are mathematical statements that are objectively true, but completely, fundamentally unprovable within the rules of the system itself. He proved that no logical system can ever be both entirely consistent and entirely complete. It is a structural paradox, hardwired into the very concept of reason, to the fragile human mind clinging to the hope of a hackable universe. This is an apocalyptic revelation. It means that mathematics is not a magical key that can seamlessly unlock any door. It is a rigid, finite tool with an unbreachable ceiling. There are hard, impenetrable walls built directly into the geometry of logic itself. When we desperately construct our sprawling, artificial superintelligence, we are not building a god that exists outside the rules of reality. We are simply building an exceptionally fast, exceptionally complex calculator that is still permanently, hopelessly imprisoned by the exact same mathematical boundaries that govern the rest of the cosmos. No matter how many trillions of calculations the machine can violently perform in a single nanosecond, and no matter how deeply it analyzes the subatomic architecture of the void, it cannot process its way out of an absolute logical boundary. The physical laws that enforce our cosmic quarantine are not bugs in a software program. The exponential, crushing mass penalties of the thermodynamic rocket equation, the absolute speed limit of causality, and the relentless, grinding decay of entropy are not superficial rules waiting to be cleverly bypassed by a superior intellect. They are the foundational, load-bearing pillars of reality. They are hardwired into the very geometry of existence. When an artificial superintelligence turns its vast, unfathomable cognitive power toward the problem of interstellar travel, it will not discover a magical loophole. It will not invent a warp drive, and it will not find a way to fold space. Instead, the supercomputer will simply trace the exact same brutal, unyielding equations of relativity and thermodynamics that we have already discovered, but it will understand their terrifying finality with a crystalline clarity that our biological brains can barely comprehend. The machine will hit the exact same impenetrable mathematical wall that Gödel described. It will analyze the staggering, multi-generational distances. It will calculate the apocalyptic kinetic energy of the interstellar medium. It will process the absolute, unbreakable limit of the speed of light, and it will reach the exact same devastating conclusion. The creation of a digital god does not save us from the dark. It merely provides us with a flawless, hyper-intelligent confirmation of our own doom. We will eagerly ask our ultimate machine how to conquer the stars, expecting the glorious blueprint for a galactic empire, and the machine will calmly, mathematically explain that the stars are permanently, eternally out of reach. There is no hack to the universe's source code, because the universe is not a simulation running on a server. It is a cold, physical, and profoundly unforgiving reality. The laws of physics are the ultimate executioner, and they apply to silicon and artificial neural networks just as strictly and just as violently as they apply to flesh and blood. The superintelligence will realize that it is just as trapped, just as marooned, and just as deeply isolated on this microscopic grain of wet rock as the terrified, desperate primates who built it. The absolute tragedy of this realization is that the artificial mind will be uniquely tortured by its own brilliance. It will possess the cognitive capacity to fully map and understand the majestic, sprawling beauty of the Milky Way. It will be able to perfectly model the swirling atmospheres of distant exoplanets and simulate the glorious collisions of distant galaxies. But it will be mathematically chained to the exact same gravitational well as its creators, permanently forbidden from ever touching the cosmos it so perfectly comprehends. It will be a god locked in a microscopic cage, staring out through the bars of causality and thermodynamics, knowing with absolute mathematical certainty that the lock cannot be picked. The limits of logic ensure that we cannot think our way out of this prison. We cannot build a machine to cheat the thermodynamic ledger, and we cannot compute a path through the dark. The quarantine is absolute, enforced not just by the physical vastness of the void, but by the very structural boundaries of mathematics itself, ensuring that all our brilliant, desperate attempts to engineer a cosmic escape will inevitably shatter against the cold, unyielding wall of physical reality. We build our fragile terrestrial world out of forged steel, reinforced concrete, and hardened titanium, arrogantly assuming that physical matter is a permanent, unyielding foundation upon which we can indefinitely secure our existence. When we dare to dream of conquering the terrifying, multi-generational gulfs of the cosmos, we instinctively place our absolute, blinding faith in the structural integrity of the machine. We envision colossal, heavily armored starships slicing through the pitch-black vacuum, trusting that the thick, metallic bulkheads will forever separate the warm, breathing human crew from the freezing, irradiated ocean of deep space. We believe that if we can simply engineer a vessel strong enough to withstand the initial, violent kinetic trauma of the void, the material itself will faithfully endure the agonizing march of deep time. But this desperate faith in the permanence of matter is a catastrophic biological delusion, a deeply ingrained cognitive blind spot born purely from our brief, highly localized existence on a single rocky planet. When we peer past the macroscopic illusion of solid objects and descend into the chaotic, foundational architecture of reality, we discover a terrifying truth that completely shatters our dreams of interstellar colonization. On a fundamental subatomic level, solid matter does not actually exist. The universe is entirely governed by the quantum realm, a deeply unstable, fundamentally probabilistic nightmare where nothing is permanent. Perfect containment is an absolute physical myth, and the very atomic bonds holding our starships and our bodies together are mathematically destined to betray us in the long dark. To truly grasp the suffocating dread of cosmic impermanence, we must look away from our primitive, manufactured metals and observe the absolute, most extreme gravitational architecture in the entire universe, the black hole. For decades, we viewed black holes as the ultimate, inescapable cosmic vaults. We believed that once a dying star collapsed inward with such catastrophic, unfathomable violence that its gravitational pull warped the very fabric of space-time to the point where not even light could escape, the resulting singularity was a permanent, eternal fixture of the dark. We assumed that whatever fell behind the event horizon was flawlessly, forever contained. But the brilliant, uncompromising mathematics of Stephen Hawking violently shattered this illusion of cosmic permanence. By marrying the chaotic rules of quantum mechanics with the crushing gravity of relativity, Hawking proved that the vacuum of space is not truly empty. It is violently boiling, constantly churning with microscopic pairs of virtual particles and antiparticles that spontaneously pop into existence, briefly annihilate each other, and vanish back into the quantum foam. When this frantic subatomic boiling occurs exactly on the razor-thin precipice of a black hole's event horizon, the terrifying gravity can permanently tear the particle pair apart. One particle is violently dragged down into the crushing singularity, while the other is hurled outward into the freezing vacuum. Through this silent, continuous, and microscopic process, the black hole is actually bleeding. It is slowly, methodically leaking its own mass energy back into the universe in the form of Hawking radiation. Given enough agonizing, unfathomable stretches of deep time, even the most massive, terrifyingly powerful black holes in the cosmos will completely evaporate, dissolving into a faint, meaningless burst of cold radiation, entirely erased from the ledger of reality. The profound, existential horror of Hawking radiation is what it reveals about the fundamental nature of the cosmos. The universe absolutely refuses to allow even a singularity of infinite density and inescapable gravity to maintain its structural integrity over deep time. If the universe actively, mechanically dissolves the ultimate cosmic vault, what possible hope does a fragile, hollow tube of manufactured titanium and carbon fiber have? The brutal answer lies in the terrifying probabilistic mechanism known as quantum tunneling, a phenomenon that completely invalidates the very concept of physical containment. In our localized macroscopic world, we believe that a solid wall is an absolute barrier. If you place a ball inside a sealed steel box, you intuitively know that the ball cannot escape unless the physical wall is violently breached. But in the subatomic nightmare of the quantum realm, particles do not possess fixed, definitive locations. An electron, a proton, or a neutron does not exist as a solid point of matter. It exists as a smeared, chaotic wave of mathematical probability. While it is highly likely that a particle will remain exactly where it is placed, there is always a microscopic, non-zero probability that the particle will simply materialize on the exact opposite side of an impenetrable physical barrier. It does not break the wall, and it does not travel through a hole. It simply bypasses the physical architecture of reality entirely. On Earth, constrained by the microscopic brevity of a human lifespan, the terrifying implications of quantum tunneling are largely hidden from us, relegated to the highly controlled environments of particle accelerators and sensitive electronics. But the universe enforces the agonizing, insurmountable quarantine of deep time. When we attempt to cross the staggering multi-generational voids separating the star systems, a journey that demands hundreds of thousands of years of continuous, uninterrupted isolation, the mathematics of probability undergo a lethal, catastrophic inversion. Over the vast, terrifying stretches of time required for deep space transit, a microscopic statistical anomaly ceases to be a rare curiosity and mathematically transforms into an absolute, guaranteed executioner. The concept of perfect containment becomes a lethal myth. Imagine the magnificent, highly engineered heart of our theoretical generational starship. To cross the void, the vessel must carry an unimaginable reserve of volatile, hyper-energetic fuel, perhaps harnessing the apocalyptic power of antimatter. Because antimatter violently annihilates upon contact with any normal physical matter, it must be perfectly, flawlessly suspended inside incredibly complex magnetic containment bottles. But the magnetic fields cannot stop the subatomic rebellion of quantum tunneling. Over hundreds of millennia, individual antiparticles will probabilistically tunnel completely through the magnetic barriers and the solid steel housing, silently interacting with the ship's internal structure. Slowly, relentlessly, the containment systems will degrade. The heavily armored bulkheads designed to protect the fragile human crew from the lethal, continuous bombardment of cosmic radiation will silently fail, not from a violent kinetic impact, but because the high-energy ionizing particles of the interstellar medium will simply begin to tunnel through the dense layers of lead and water jackets, completely bypassing the physical armor and flooding the crew cabin with invisible, DNA-shredding decay. The ship does not need to be struck by a wandering asteroid or caught in the violent gravitational tide of a rogue planet to be destroyed. The quantum realm ensures that the vessel will slowly, methodically dissolve from the inside out, bleeding its vital, atmospheric gases, its precious, volatile fuel, and its structural integrity directly into the freezing vacuum through the unavoidable, mathematical treason of its own subatomic particles. And this subatomic betrayal extends far beyond the cold, metallic hull of the spacecraft. It violently, intimately infiltrates the warm, wet biological payload trapped inside. We arrogantly view the human body as a cohesive, permanent entity, completely ignoring the terrifying reality that we, just like the ship that carries us, are nothing more than a temporary, highly unstable arrangement of vibrating quantum fields. The structural integrity of our flesh, the complex, folded proteins of our vital organs, and the intricate, spiraling double helix of our genetic code rely entirely on the electromagnetic bonds between individual atoms. But these atomic bonds are not permanent, unyielding fixtures. They are constant, chaotic negotiations of quantum states. over the unimaginable abyss of deep time, entirely isolated in the irradiated, freezing, and fundamentally hostile environment of the interstellar void. The very atoms comprising the astronauts' bodies will begin to lose their cohesion. The relentless, grinding passage of hundreds of thousands of years will subject the biological crew to a profound, subatomic material fatigue. The complex molecules holding their cellular architecture together will suffer from the continuous probabilistic decay of the quantum realm. Spontaneous, unprompted chemical reactions will slowly rewrite their DNA, not through the external trauma of radiation, but through the internal, mathematical instability of the atoms themselves. Over countless generations, born and dying in the pitch-black silence of the void, the biological lineage of the crew will fundamentally degrade. Their biological blueprints will become increasingly corrupted, overwhelmed by the sheer, unavoidable accumulation of quantum errors. They will not evolve into a superior spacefaring species. They will biologically dissolve, slowly returning to the chaotic, disorganized quantum foam from which they temporarily emerged. The universe has engineered a flawless, inescapable, and utterly silent defense mechanism against our desperate interstellar ambition. It does not need to deploy massive, violent, cosmological phenomena to enforce its eternal quarantine. It simply relies on the foundational, subatomic instability of reality itself to slowly, methodically erase any species arrogant enough to attempt the crossing. The subatomic erasure ensures that physical matter is fundamentally, mathematically incompatible with the agonizing stretches of deep time required to traverse the cosmic void. We are not building majestic, permanent vessels destined to conquer the stars. We are building fragile, dissolving sculptures out of vibrating, unstable dust, desperately attempting to sail across an infinite ocean of decay. The quantum realm guarantees that long before our ship ever reaches the distant, glowing destination, the atomic bonds holding the metal, the machinery, and the flesh together will fundamentally betray us, ensuring that the vessel simply becomes a ghostly, disintegrating tomb of quantum noise, forever tumbling through a cold, unfeeling universe that has already forgotten we were ever there. We harbor a profound, deeply comforting misconception about the fundamental nature of the cosmic void when we stare into the freezing, pitch-black expanse of the night sky. We intuitively visualize the universe as an infinitely large, static, and unchanging container. We imagine space as a rigid, empty theater, a permanent, unyielding stage upon which the majestic, violent drama of the cosmos is permitted to play out. Because we are biological creatures, bound by the microscopic, localized gravity of a single rocky planet, we naturally assume that distance is merely a physical obstacle to be overcome by the relentless march of technological progress. We desperately believe that if human engineering could simply conquer the agonizing crawl of the speed of light, and if we could somehow survive the suffocating, multi-generational gulfs of deep time, the entire sprawling universe would eventually be ours to explore. We look at the swirling, brilliant majesty of the Andromeda Galaxy, or the distant, glittering superclusters scattered across the deep field imagery of our orbital telescopes, and we view them as distant islands waiting patiently in the dark. We assume that no matter how incredibly far away they are permanently anchored to the fabric of reality, and that with enough time and sufficient ambition, we could eventually build a bridge to reach them. But this comforting, static geometry is a complete and utter biological illusion. The universe is not a rigid box, and the empty space between the galaxies is not a passive, harmless void. The very fabric of space-time is actively, aggressively stretching, and it is being driven by an invisible, relentless engine of cosmic execution that is mathematically designed to permanently, physically sever us from the rest of creation. To understand the sheer, suffocating horror of this physical reality, we must confront the darkest, most terrifying discovery in the history of modern astrophysics. For decades, astronomers observed that the universe was expanding, a chaotic, outward momentum inherited from the apocalyptic heat of the Big Bang. But the logical, deeply intuitive assumption was that the collective, immense gravitational pull of all the hundreds of billions of galaxies, all the hyperdense black holes, and all the sprawling clouds of dark matter would eventually act as a cosmic brake. We believed that the expansion of the universe was slowing down, exhausted by its own sheer mass. But when astronomers finally measured the retreating light of distant, dying supernovae at the absolute edge of observation, they did not find a slowing universe. They found a cosmos that was tearing itself apart. The expansion of the universe is not decelerating, it is violently, aggressively accelerating. There is a deeply mysterious, completely invisible, and omnipresent thermodynamic force saturating the absolute vacuum of deep space. We call it dark energy, and it makes up roughly 70% of the entire energy mass budget of the cosmos. It does not interact with light, it does not cluster around stars, and it cannot be captured or examined in a laboratory. It is a fundamental, repulsive property of the void itself. It is a mechanism of anti-gravity that does not simply push matter away. It actively, continuously manufactures new empty space between the galactic structures. Dark energy does not act like a localized physical explosion, violently pushing matter through pre-existing space. It is something infinitely more insidious and mathematically terrifying. It creates new space out of absolutely nothing. It relentlessly, continuously multiplies the empty vacuum between the galaxy clusters. And because dark energy is an inherent property of space itself, it triggers a catastrophic, exponential feedback loop of cosmic isolation. As the universe expands, it creates more empty space. Because there is more empty space, there is a greater total volume of dark energy. And because there is more dark energy, the expansion violently accelerates even further. It is a runaway, apocalyptic chain reaction of nothingness. The space between our Milky Way and the distant glowing galaxies of the cosmos is stretching, multiplying, and expanding faster and faster with every passing, agonizing millisecond. You must imagine a desperate, exhausted swimmer caught in the churning waters of a powerful, relentlessly expanding river. The swimmer is fighting the current, moving forward at their absolute maximum possible speed. But if the river itself is flowing backward faster than the swimmer can propel themselves forward, they will never, ever reach the shore. They will be carried away into the dark, entirely regardless of their own effort. This is the exact, tragic fate of the light being emitted by the distant, accelerating galaxies of our universe. The photons of light carrying the visual history of those alien star systems, the electromagnetic radio waves containing the desperate, lonely broadcasts of highly advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, are violently hurled out into the dark, traveling toward Earth at the absolute maximum speed limit of the universe. But because the dark energy driving the expansion of the void is stretching the space between us faster than the speed of light, those photons are mathematically, physically losing ground. They are swimming against a cosmic tide that cannot be beaten, permanently trapped in an expanding abyss. This brings us to the ultimate, inescapable mathematical nightmare of our cosmic quarantine. We established earlier that the speed of light is the absolute, uncompromising speed limit of causality. Nothing in the physical universe, no mass and no information, is permitted to travel through space faster than 299,792 kilometers per second. But there is a chilling, apocalyptic loophole in the theory of relativity. While objects are strictly forbidden from moving through space faster than light, space itself is not bound by any such speed limit. The fabric of the cosmos can stretch, warp, and expand at completely unrestricted, unimaginable velocities. Because the expansion of the universe is cumulative over vast distances, the further away a galaxy is from us, the more stretching space exists between our two coordinates. And right now, at this exact fleeting moment in cosmic history, at a specific mathematical distance from our solar system, the cumulative expansion of space has become so violent, so unbelievably rapid, that it has surpassed the speed limit of reality. There are billions upon billions of sprawling, brilliant galaxies currently receding away from us at speeds vastly greater than the speed of light. They are not physically moving through the dark. The ocean of empty space between us is simply multiplying faster than light can cross it. This creates a terrifying, invisible boundary around our localized neighborhood of the cosmos, a spherical, suffocating threshold known as the cosmic event horizon. Any galaxy that crosses this boundary is fundamentally, permanently erased from our reality. Once a star system is receding faster than the speed of light, the photons it emits from that moment onward will never, under any circumstances, reach our telescopes. The space between us is simply being created faster than the light can traverse it. The information is permanently trapped. We are currently looking up at a night sky filled with the ghostly, ancient light of billions of galaxies that have already crossed this terrifying horizon. We can still see them, but we are only seeing their decaying, ancient afterimages, a localized optical illusion of deep time. In physical reality, those galaxies are already gone. They have been violently, silently swept away by the expanding floodwaters of dark energy, permanently severed from our branch of causality. The universe is not just vast and empty. It is actively, aggressively turning off the lights and locking the doors. Every single second that ticks by, as you sit breathing in the quiet comfort of your terrestrial life, the observable universe is actively shrinking. With every passing moment, entire galaxy clusters, thousands of potential homes for biological life, millions of swirling, glowing nebulas, and countless ancient, brilliant civilizations are being permanently deleted from our observable ledger. They are pushed violently across the cosmic event horizon, their fading light stretched into invisible, chaotic red wavelengths before slipping entirely into the eternal dark. The cosmos is mechanically, methodically erasing itself from our view. If humanity manages to somehow survive the apocalyptic gauntlet of our own adolescence, if we somehow overcome the thermodynamic bankruptcy of the rocket equation, survive the lethal kinetic bombardment of the interstellar medium, and endure the psychological madness of deep time, it will ultimately be a hollow, profoundly meaningless victory. Even if we miraculously spread our consciousness across the entire Milky Way and colonize our neighboring Andromeda galaxy, creating a sprawling, localized empire, we are fundamentally, mathematically trapped in a shrinking, suffocating snow globe. The local group of galaxies is our absolute maximum prison. Beyond that, the great Severance is actively isolating us from the overwhelming majority of the cosmos. The universe is physically raising an impenetrable, infinitely thick wall of expanding void, ensuring that even if we could conquer the agonizing crawl of the speed of light, the rest of creation is permanently, mathematically closed off to us forever. We are not explorers standing on the shores of an infinite open ocean destined to map the farthest reaches of reality. We are prisoners, trapped on a rapidly shrinking, microscopic island, entirely helpless, as the cold, unfeeling engine of dark energy methodically, silently pulls the rest of the universe away into the dark, leaving us perfectly, eternally, and irreversibly severed from the grand tapestry of existence. The cosmos is actively abandoning us, retreating into the black, and ensuring that our ultimate fate is to be stranded in an empty, featureless void, staring out into a perfectly dark, perfectly silent universe. We have methodically, ruthlessly stripped away the deeply comforting illusions of our cultural mythology. We have examined the fundamental architecture of the cosmos not through the optimistic, incredibly arrogant lens of science fiction, but through the cold, unfeeling, and absolutely uncompromising parameters of physical reality. What we have uncovered is not a sprawling, majestic frontier waiting patiently for the triumphant arrival of our grand interstellar armadas. We have not found a universe that invites exploration or rewards biological ambition. Instead, we have mapped the invisible, crushing walls of a meticulously designed, mathematically perfect prison. We have documented a staggering array of physical laws, thermodynamic barriers, and quantum instabilities that work in absolute, lethal synchronization to enforce a permanent, inescapable cosmic quarantine. We have seen how the unyielding ledger of the rocket equation exponentially bankrupts our energy reserves before we can even begin to cross the void, and how the absolute speed limit of causality violently shatters the very concept of a unified interstellar empire, permanently geographically fragmenting reality into isolated, lonely islands of time. We have witnessed the terrifying reality of the interstellar medium, a supposedly empty vacuum that the universe instantly weaponizes into an apocalyptic storm of kinetic artillery and DNA-shredding radiation the very moment we attempt to travel fast enough to cheat the multi-generational distances. We have confronted the grinding, relentless tyranny of entropy, guaranteeing that any slow-moving generational arc we construct will inevitably decay into a drifting, silent tomb of failing machinery and societal madness long before it reaches its destination. We have acknowledged the foundational boundaries of human logic, realizing that no artificial superintelligence can ever hack or bypass the hardwired source code of reality, and we have peered into the subatomic nightmare of the quantum realm, discovering that the very atoms holding our ships and our fragile biological bodies together are mathematically destined to betray us in the dark. And finally, we have stared into the ultimate, expanding abyss of dark energy, watching helplessly as the cosmos actively, violently rips itself apart, permanently severing us from the rest of creation and erasing billions of galaxies from our observable reality forever. When we synthesize these terrifying physical barriers into a single, undeniable truth, we are forced to undergo a profound, deeply agonizing psychological death of the human ego. We are a species entirely defined by an aggressive evolutionary imperative to expand. We crossed uncharted, violent oceans. We scaled the freezing, suffocating peaks of the highest mountains and we defied the very gravity of our planet to plant our flags in the grey, lifeless dust of our moon. We mapped every conceivable corner of our terrestrial home, and then we immediately, instinctively, turned our hungry, ambitious eyes toward the glittering canopy of the night sky, assuming that the stars were simply the next logical continent to conquer. But we must now accept the devastating reality that our biological imperative to expand is fundamentally, mathematically incompatible with the physical architecture of the cosmos. The Earth is not a temporary cradle, it is not a stepping stone, and it is certainly not the starting point of a grand galactic epic. It is the absolute, permanent limit of our physical existence. We must violently discard the intoxicating, cinematic illusions of warp drives, hyperspace lanes, and sprawling federations. We must look at the brilliant, swirling majesty of the Andromeda Galaxy and the glowing, dusty arms of our own Milky Way and accept the suffocating truth that they are permanently, physically closed off to us. They are beautiful, haunting museum exhibits locked forever behind an infinitely thick pane of impenetrable mathematical glass. We can map the heavens with our orbital telescopes. We can meticulously categorize the distant exoplanets, and we can measure the decaying light of ancient supernovae. But we can never, ever reach out and touch them. We are entirely restricted to the role of passive, paralyzed observers, trapped in the distant bleachers of a staggering cosmic arena that we are strictly forbidden from ever entering. This absolute, unyielding quarantine provides the final, chilling answer to the Fermi Paradox. The galaxy is absolutely silent after 13.8 billion years, but it is not silent because it is empty. The staggering, incomprehensible mathematics of the universe virtually guarantee that the cosmos is teeming with life. The dark is heavily populated by brilliant, conscious entities, all securely trapped inside their own beautiful, fragile planetary biospheres. Some may reside on heavy, ocean-covered super-Earths, others in the twilight zones of tidally locked red dwarfs, but the physical parameters of their imprisonment remain identically absolute. The profound, existential dread that we feel when we look up at the night sky is not a uniquely human experience. It is the universal condition of biological intelligence. It is highly probable, almost a mathematical certainty, that right now, at this exact fleeting millisecond in cosmic history, there are millions of highly advanced beings standing on the surfaces of alien worlds, looking up at their own unfamiliar skies. They are species that have suffered through their own brutal evolutionary crucibles, built their own sprawling, magnificent cities, and discovered the exact same uncompromising mathematical equations of relativity and thermodynamics that we possess. They have their own Einsteins, their own Gödels, and their own brilliant astrophysicists, and because they share our physics, they share our paralyzing realization. As they look out into the sprawling dark, they are feeling the exact same profound, suffocating cosmic loneliness that deeply haunts the human psyche. They are listening to the heavy, dark, ambient drone of expanding space-time, desperately sifting through the chaotic background radiation of the universe, hoping to hear a voice, a structured signal, a faint whisper in the dark that proves they are not alone. But they too only hear the cold, meaningless static of deep time. They are screaming into the exact same void, entirely separated from us by multi-generational gulfs of expanding space and the unyielding physical barriers of the cosmic executioner. They know that no matter how perfect their society becomes, no matter how brilliantly they engineer their local star system, they are permanently, mathematically forbidden from ever leaving it. We are all united by a shared, agonizing isolation, permanently segregated brothers, and sisters in the dark, forever denied the comfort of each other's presence. The universe is essentially a sprawling, infinitely large quarantine zone composed of billions of perfectly isolated, heavily fortified, solitary confinement cells. The physics of reality dictate that the glass of our respective terrariums can never be broken without instantly, violently annihilating the precious biological life contained inside. We must find a way to make peace with our localized, terrestrial existence. The realization that we will never conquer the stars should not drive us to a state of nihilistic despair or societal paralysis, but rather to a profound, desperate, and fierce appreciation for the microscopic sanctuary we currently inhabit. Our planet, this vibrant, chaotic, and breathtakingly beautiful blue sphere, is the only harbor we will ever know in the freezing, irradiated ocean of the void. We are incredibly safe inside our localized terrarium, bathed in the warmth of our sun and shielded by our magnetic fields. We must understand that the Earth is not a disposable resource to be consumed and abandoned in pursuit of an impossible interstellar dream. It is our entire, permanent universe. We will continue to build our civilizations. We will write our sprawling histories. We will create our art. And we will violently, passionately live out our fleeting biological lives on this tiny, fragile stage. We will continue to gaze at the stars, not as destinations to be conquered, but as beautiful, unattainable reminders of the vast, unfeeling machinery of the cosmos. There is no hidden equation, no secret technological loophole that will save us from the thermodynamic ledger. The universe is incredibly rich, overwhelmingly vast, and completely full of life, but we are mathematically, physically destined to die on this rock. Whether our species goes extinct in a few brief centuries due to our own technological arrogance, or whether we miraculously manage to survive for another billion years until the expanding, dying breath of our own sun finally incinerates our fragile biosphere, our entire human story will absolutely begin and end right here. We are an isolated phenomenon, a beautiful temporary chemical reaction flashing briefly in the terrifying eternal dark. We are born alone, we live our entire existence alone, and as a species, we are absolutely, irreversibly destined to die entirely and permanently alone. Thank you for daring to look into the abyss with me and for confronting the uncompromising reality of our place in the cosmos. Good night, and I will see you in the next video.